Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me now? Okay, it's a little bit of reverb. Okay, so we're in Judges chapter 12. We're discussing Jephthah, and we left off last week, let's see, around verse 30. So we skipped over the vow and we went to the actual battle and saw that the Lord won the battle, but we just said we would come back and discuss the vow this week since I didn't really have time to start that last week. So actually we'll start back in verse 29 for this week. So Judges chapter 12, verse 29. So it says, Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed through Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he advanced toward the people of Ammon. So just like Gideon, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephthah, and he's able to then recruit troops as a result of that to help him in the battle. It doesn't really elaborate what the expression means, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, but in some way he becomes a leader that the people respond to, and so he's able to get troops and recruit them to be able to go into battle. Now you would think once you have the Spirit of the Lord upon you that would be a sign from God that you're going to win the battle and that you should be confident that that's going to take place, but that is not where Jephthah is mentally at this time, and that's why he's going to issue this vow. So in verse 30, the vow is, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. So the vow is like a covenant. So once he opens his mouth and he says this, he is bound by it, particularly if God keeps up his end of the bargain. And so the vow is, he said in verse 30, If you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So there's two things Gideon is asking for, and if God gives those two things, then he will give in return the other thing. So the two things that Jephthah is asking for is, one, he wants God to deliver Ammon into his hands. In other words, he wants God to help him win the battle. And then two, he wants to return home in peace from the battle. So what Jephthah is really asking God for is, Jephthah is really in love with the fact that he is now the political and military ruler of at least Gilead, okay? And he doesn't want to lose that. So he is willing to make a vow to God so that God will allow him to keep this position, and he's willing to sacrifice something to keep this position. So what is it he's willing to sacrifice? Well, you need to back up a little bit and think about who Jephthah is, okay? Jephthah is the son of a prostitute. His mother, though we don't know for sure, is highly likely to be a Canaanite. His brothers kicked him out of his family, and he went around as a bandit with a bunch of worthless people who may have been Israelites or they may have been Canaanites. They probably were Canaanites, okay? Being a bandit roving in the area with probably other Canaanites, he would have come in contact with Edom and with Moab over time, and the Canaanites, as well as the Moabites and the Edomites, all practiced child sacrifice, okay? That was a common practice for them, to offer their children as sacrifice to their gods. So, with all that in mind, what is he saying he's going to give up to keep being the ruler of Gilead? Well, what he says is he'll give God whatever the first thing that walks out of the door is when he comes home. What do you think he would think the first thing that would come out of the door would be? A pet? or a person, okay? It's possible it could be an animal that would come out of the house. But if you are a father coming home, who do you hope the first person out of the house is to greet you? Hopefully your child. What? Right. So basically, you have a guy who grew up worshiping Baal. He's familiar with child sacrifice of the Moabites and the Edomites. And he's familiar with this type of mentality. It's not a stretch of the imagination to think that what he is actually offering is whatever comes out of my house, even up to the possibility of it being my only child, I'm willing to give that up to remain the leader of Gilead. And that seems to be what he is vowing to God. Now, a couple things to notice here. Jephthah is also a politician and he is a bargainer. When he negotiates with the elders of Gilead, he gets exactly what he wants. They initially offered him just military command. He barters with them, and they end up giving him full command. He then tries to barter with Ammon through the envoys with their king, and he gets a negative response from them. So with the elders of Gilead, he gets a positive response. When he barters with the king of Ammon, he gets a negative response. Now he's trying to barter with God. So he's saying, if you do this and this, then I will do this. God doesn't answer him at all, not verbally. Okay, so he gets silence when he tries to barter with God. Okay. Now, when you look, though, God actually keeps up his end of this agreement. Even though God doesn't verbally say he's going to join into this covenant with Jephthah, he in effect does. So if you notice, Jephthah asks for two things. One, deliver Ammon into my hands. Two, let me go home in peace. So if you notice, in verse 32, at the end of the verse, it's the exact same quote. So in 30, he says, the vow, it says, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands. And then in verse 32, it says, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. So God kept up that part of the vow. Now, when you skip down to verse 34, which is where we left off last week, now God's keeping up the other end of it, which Jephthah is now going home in peace. And so God has done both things that Jephthah has requested. Now Jephthah is obligated to do the one thing that he said he would do. So verse 34, when Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. So the author is trying to really stress the point that this is his only child. Okay, he doesn't have another male child, another female child. It's just this one girl. And so he comes home in peace, and his daughter is the first person to come out to greet him. And she doesn't greet him as a military commander, she greets him as a father. So she's very excited to see her father come home. Obviously, he's been gone for a while. Verse 35, and it came to pass when he saw her, notice what it says here. If you made a vow that you're willing to sacrifice your only child, and you realize now that you have to do that, would you be more concerned for yourself or for your child? You see what kind of person that Jephthah is. Notice what happens here. It says in verse 35, when it came to pass, when he saw her, he tore his clothes and he said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord and I cannot take it back. He doesn't express any concern for his daughter. He's sad for himself. What kind of father is he? He's not a very good father. Okay, why is he sad for himself? Because when he sacrifices his daughter, what happens to his family name and his family line? It ends. I'm not saying he doesn't care about his daughter, but he cares more about himself, his name, and his family line than he cares about his daughter, okay? He is not a good father, okay? Verse 36, the end of 35. No, wait, I finished 35. 36. So she said to him, so the daughter responds back, and the daughter is actually made to look like, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say a heroine, but she's made to look like a good figure in contrast to her father. So you end up kind of feeling pity for her as opposed to her father, who you kind of feel like he's just really kind of a pathetic figure. So verse 36, so she said to him, my father, if you have given your word to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the people of Ammon. So she speaks the truth. God, you said something to God. God kept his end of the bargain. He avenged you against Ammon like you asked. So now you got to keep your end of the bargain. So then she said to her father, let this thing be done to me. Let me alone for 2 months that I may go up and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I. So it's kind of interesting. How much, I'm not saying she doesn't love her father either, but how good is their relationship that she knows that she has 2 months to live and she doesn't want to spend it with her family, she wants to go spend it with her friends, okay? I think that speaks a little bit about how good of a father he really is, that he's not the one that she wants to spend her time with for the remaining days that she has. But she's going to agree to this because Jephthah made this vow. So 38, so he said, go, and he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountain. Verse 39, and so it was at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with her which he had vowed. She knew no man. And it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went 4 days each year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. So at the end of the story here, the author makes you feel sorry for the daughter and pretty much disdain for Jephthah, okay? And if you notice, is there any memorial to Jephthah? He strove so hard to be the leader of Israel, or at least of Gilead. He won this battle against Ammon, and yet in the end, there's no memorial to Jephthah. There's a memorial for his daughter, who he murdered, okay? So let's go back and talk about a little bit. So did he actually kill her? There are some theories out there that, okay, he just dedicated her to the temple. He didn't really murder her. You have to remember the way the author's writing the book. Each judge is worse than the one before. What did Abimelech do in the preceding story? Abimelech, to get power, was willing to do what? He murdered 69 half-brothers. Jephthah says, let me do one better. I'm going to murder my daughter to keep my power. And so it seems very clear that he did not dedicate her to the temple. He actually sacrificed her. And if you read what the author actually says in verse 39, it says, and it was so at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and what did he do? He carried out his vow with her which he had vowed. The vow was, I will sacrifice whatever walks through the door. And the author says he kept the vow. Okay, so the author doesn't go into detail about the actual sacrifice, but he says that he did it. All right. Now, a couple of things. Did he have to do it? Yes and no. Okay, there are 3 possibilities of what Jephthah could have done. He could have done what he did, which is the cowardly thing, and that's what he chose. Okay. The other option was he could have not sacrificed his daughter and let the curse of God fall upon him for breaking the vow and let his daughter live. He chose not to do that. He did not want, his vow was for peace. His vow was, let me win the battle and let me have peace. He chose peace over his daughter's life. Okay? He could have let his daughter live and let God punish him for breaking the vow. He chose not to do that. The other thing he could have done, maybe, depending on how you interpret Leviticus 27, I think it is. I think it's 27. It's 27 or 28. In Leviticus, there is a ordinance for how you can buy back something that you wanted to dedicate to God. It's a little bit murky whether or not it would apply in this case. Okay, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But the fact is, Jephthah didn't consider it, nor did his daughter. And what does that tell you about both of them? That they didn't really know God's law. Because if they would have known God's law, they would have known that there was an out in God's law that would have allowed them to get out of this situation. Okay? Apparently he's unaware of it, or if he was aware of it, thought maybe it didn't apply in this situation. Okay? Anyway, out of all the three options, Jephthah chooses the cowardly one, which is to sacrifice his daughter. Now, is it really a sacrifice? God doesn't want his daughter murdered. It's really a murder. He murdered his daughter so that he could stay in power. That's really what it boils down to. But does it even work for him? Does he keep peace? And does he keep power as a result of this? Well, that takes you into chapter 12. And the answer is no to both of them. So it doesn't. God kept up his end of the bargain for returning home in peace initially and winning the battle. But it doesn't gain him long-term peace. So in chapter 12, it says, Then the men of Ephraim gathered together, crossed over toward Zephon, and said to Jephthah. Now remember, they did the exact same thing to Gideon, okay? When Gideon chased Moab and he called Ephraim to come help, at that point, Ephraim helped, but Ephraim then got mad later and said, why didn't you call us earlier when the battle actually started? Ephraim, the author makes Ephraim look bad over and over. He has some problem with Ephraim for whatever reason. And so once again, Ephraim feels slighted, so Ephraim throws sort of a temper tantrum at the judge. And so, but this time it's a little bit more serious. They actually bring their troops and cross the river, and they're ready to fight, basically. And so they approach Jephthah and they say, why did you cross over to fight against the people of Ammon and did not call us to go with you? We will burn down your house upon you with fire. So they're a little more serious this time than they were with Gideon, which is kind of humorous. So, and it's actually gets really funny in a minute, the way the author paints a picture of them. So verse 2, Jephthah responds, and just like he tried with negotiating with the elders of Gilead, how he tried negotiating with the king of Ammon, how he tried to negotiate with God, he now tries to negotiate with Ephraim, but sort of. In some ways he tries to negotiate, in some ways he tries to instigate or agitate them. So in verse 2 it says, my people and I were in great struggle, and that English translation does not bring forth the Hebrew idiom that is really there. Basically what he's saying is, I'm a contentious guy. I kind of like to fight. You're fighting with the wrong guy, because if you want to fight, we'll fight. That's basically what he's saying. So he's basically like, if you're wanting to look for a fight, you came to the right place, because I'm willing to fight. And he goes on, he says that they were in a great struggle with Ammon, and when I called you, you did not deliver me out of their hands. Now, there's no record in the text here that he ever called Ephraim. This is probably a lie, unless he did it, but the text doesn't record it. but it didn't record it, so it's highly possible that Jephthah's just lying here to try to, maybe to kind of agitate him a little bit. So verse 3, so when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands and crossed over against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Now he's sort of singing his own praises. He's kind of like, you guys didn't come help. So I just kind of took matters in my own hand, and God gave me this victory. So he says then, why then have you come up this day to fight against me? Verse 4, now Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. So notice in this confrontation, one, just like Ephraim did with Gideon, Ephraim doesn't really have any concern for Israel as a nation. They're really only concerned about themselves as a tribe. So they're willing to stir up trouble with other tribes pretty regularly. And they really care more about themselves than about national unity. On the flip side, Jephthah is pretty much the same. He doesn't really care that much about diplomacy with Ephraim, and he does not appeal to God for what they should do. They make him mad, and he's ready to fight, and that's basically what happens. So there's no appeal to God in all this about what they should do or anything, and so they fight. So let's see, verse 4, midway through verse 4, it says, and the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim because they said, this is part of what agitated Jephthah to fight. Ephraim insulted him. They said, you Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites. That's the tribe of Manasseh. So remember, Gilead is part of Manasseh. And they probably know that Jephthah was kicked out of his family home and was a bandit with these probably Canaanites he was running around with. And they're probably making a reference to this, that when they say fugitive, they mean you're not going to find any place to live inside of Ephraim because we don't want you. And you're probably not going to find a place to live back in Manasseh either, which is where Gilead is, because they don't want you either. And so basically Ephraim insults Jephthah and the other Gileadites with him. That makes him mad. So then they fight over it. So verse 5, the Gileadites seized the fords of the Jordan before the Ephraimites arrived. So they immediately go to the Jordan and they take the fords so that the Ephraimites can't cross the river to escape. So they basically trap them there so they can fight them. And the picture that the author paints of Ephraim is humorous. Basically, the author is showing that Ephraim doesn't care anything about national unity. Ephraim is easily offended and gets their feelings hurt. And then he's going to go on to make fun of the fact that they're terrible fighters. So they like to pick fights, but then they're not really good in the fight because they're about to get smacked down by Gilead here. And then he also makes fun of them because they can't speak proper Hebrew. Okay, so the author is taking multiple shots at Ephraim here, making fun of them. So in verse 5, Gilead takes the fords, and then he also makes fun of them for this. So if your enemy took the fords, why would you just walk up to the enemy and see if they'll let you cross the river? That doesn't make any sense. Of course, they're not going to let you cross the river. They're just going to kill you when you walk up to them. So it says the Ephraimites who escaped the battle would go up to the fords and ask the Gileadites, can we cross? Let me cross over. The men of Gilead would say, are you an Ephraimite? If he said no, which of course they would, then they would say to him, then say Shibboleth, and he would say Sibboleth. It's a direct transliteration from the Hebrew. In other words, they couldn't pronounce the SH. They would just say it with the S. It's actually two different letters in Hebrew. So they couldn't pronounce the word. The word just means an ear, like an ear of corn. So they were just saying, say this one word, and they knew they wouldn't pronounce it right. And that was a dead giveaway that they were really from Ephraim, they weren't from Gilead or Manasseh. And when they would say that, they would just kill them because they knew where they were from. So let's see. Going on in that verse, and they would take him and kill him at the fords of the Jordan. There fell at that time 42,000 Ephraimites. So, and then it says in 7, and Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried among the cities of Gilead. So Jephthah ruled for 6 years. He did all this to rule for only 6 years. He sacrificed his own daughter just to rule for 6 years. And in the end, what kind of picture do we have of Jephthah? Well, he's a pretty good politician. He's a horrible father. He's a horrible spiritual leader. And the country is worse off after his rule than it is before his rule started. He basically just about wiped out the entire tribe of Ephraim here, okay? So there's almost a whole tribe gone now because of him and what they did here. And so the country is actually worse now than they were when they started. We're not going to flip back, but if you remember where the story started in chapter 10, God sold Israel into two countries' hands, Ammon from the east and the Philistines from the west. This whole story of Jephthah has been dealing with what was going on in the east with Ammon. The situation with the Philistines in the west has been going on all along, but the story didn't focus on that. But the Samson story that comes up next picks up from chapter 10 where that left off. So in chapter 10, the author says, okay, we got an Ammonite problem on the east and a Philistine problem on the west. They spend 3 chapters on the east. Now we're about to go over to what was going on the west, okay? So the situation with Jephthah was, okay, he defeated Ammon, but really what's happening in the east is worse than it was before he started because spiritually they're worse off now than they were before Jephthah took over, okay? Any questions on Jephthah? Okay, there's a real quick break here with a couple mention of a couple of other judges, and then it starts the Samson account. So verse 8, it says, after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. Ibzan means swift. He had 30 sons, and he gave away 30 daughters in marriage and brought in 30 daughters from elsewhere for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years, then Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. The New King James leaves this a little vague. When it says he gave his daughters in marriage and then he brought in women for his sons, it literally says outside the clan, but probably still within the tribe. So he's not necessarily saying that he gave them to Canaanites. It just means that it's outside of the clan. And why he would do that, because it's like any of the other stories in the Old Testament. When you give your child away in marriage, you're creating a political bond with the other group by doing that. And so if he gives his daughters to men from other clans that are still part of the same tribe, then he's improving his political stability with the inside the tribe as a whole. And so he was actually a very smart judge. It appears that he had peace during his time at least, but it doesn't say a whole lot about him otherwise. Verse 11, after him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel. He judged Israel 10 years, and Elon the Zebulunite died, and he was buried at Aijalon in the country of Zebulun. So it really doesn't say anything about him other than the fact he lived, basically, and he judged for 10 years. Verse 13, after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 young donkeys. The symbolism there is probably that he ruled in a time of peace. That's probably what the 40 sons and 30 grandsons on donkeys represents, that it was a peaceful time. He judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel the Pirathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the mountains of the Amalekites. So those are the other judges that it mentions. Okay, Samson is our last judge in the book. This story is way different than the other stories. You may not remember, but back in the introduction, I kind of talked about how the author laid out the stories, and the typical order is the people stray from God, then they're oppressed by another nation, then they cry out to God, then God delivers them by raising up a judge to help deliver them. This story has some of those elements, but the way it's presented is very different. So this story is a lot different than the other stories, and it sort of degrades as the story goes to kind of bring about the fact that Samson is the worst of all of the judges, okay? It starts with a lot of promise because there's a whole lot more discussion about how Samson was chosen to be a judge. So you might think, well, if it's this much discussion about how he's going to be chosen as a judge, then there's a lot expected of him, so then he should be a good judge. A lot's expected of him, but he's a really, really bad judge, okay? So it kind of presents a lot of initial information to contrast with how bad he ends up being. He really falls short in a lot of ways of what he should have been. He's kind of like an elite athlete that you expect a lot of, like when they go to college, and then they tear their ACL the first day. I mean, there's like a lot of expectation and hype, and then nothing. So it's kind of what Samson is. Okay, chapter 13. Again, it starts off like it always does. Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, which they apparently always did. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. So this is picking up where chapter 10 left off. So now we're dealing with the Philistines, okay? So the Philistines ruled over the Israelites for 40 years. So now God's going to start beginning a process to get Israel out of this situation. So verse 2, now there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. So the tribe involved here is Dan. Dan is frequently pictured as the worst tribe of all of Israel. And they are a tribe that pretty much disappear not too shortly in the future of Israel because of their apostasy and just general not goodness. But this town, Zorah is on the border of Dan and I think Judah. So that's where these two tribes are going to come into play in this story. All right, verse 3. Oh, sorry. So the main character in this chapter is actually the mother, but she goes unnamed in the chapter. The father is named as Manoah, but he's going to be made to look like an idiot, basically, because he probably is, based on the way the account reads. Whereas the mother seems to be fairly upstanding and pious, at least more so than the husband. So the husband kind of comes off looking foolish, whereas the mother is really the central figure here that the author wants to bring out. And why is that? Well, one, she's probably the better character in general. But two, it's a compare-contrast with Samson, okay, and what happens in Samson's life. Samson is brought into the world by his mother, who is the best character in the story. You compare the mother against who are the people of his downfall, the women of the story, okay? So you have a good mother compared to three bad women who are going to lead to his ultimate demise, okay? So the author is using this as a way of compare and contrast. If he would have kind of stuck with his mother and what his mother probably would have liked for him, he would have been way better off, but he does what he wants with these other women, and it leads to his ultimate failure. Okay, so the mother is barren, that's mentioned in verse 2. So the story sounds a lot initially like the Abraham-Sarah story, a little bit like the Hannah story. Some parts that are different, though. There's no suggestion here that she asked God for a child. Maybe she did, it's just not recorded. But you kind of need to understand that at this time, one of the main things a woman could do for status would be to have children. And the main thing for a husband and wife is to have a child to carry on the family line. And so this is an exact opposition to the Jephthah story. Jephthah is willing to sacrifice his child and his family line just so he can be in power. This family has no hope of a family line at this point. And so this will be a very big blessing to them to get this child, because otherwise they would have no continuation of the family name and the family line without it. So kind of with all that in mind, we'll keep going. So verse 3, and the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, so the angel of the Lord has appeared multiple times in the book. We won't really discuss who it is exactly. Just remember the word angel means messenger. Can mean an earthly messenger or a heavenly messenger. In this case, it means a heavenly messenger, in other words, an angel. So the angel appears to her and says to her, now notice, who does the angel appear to? Just the mother, not the father. The father doesn't witness this, okay? All right, so the angel says, indeed now you are barren and have borne no children. Yes, she's aware of this. But you shall conceive and bear a son. Now, to have a child is spectacular. To have a male child in this society is even better. So this is big time news for her. So verse 4, now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink. So what the angel is doing is he's instituting the Nazirite vow that the child is going to take, but the vow is going to apply to the mother while she is pregnant, so that none of these contaminants, if you will affect the child while it's in utero. So she has to keep the vow as well while she's pregnant, and then make sure that the child keeps the vow all of its life, okay? So he's initially telling her what to do, and then he's going to tell her what to have the child do. So it says, indeed now, verse 4, now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive, and actually the Hebrew there, I think, is actually you've already conceived. So she's probably already pregnant at this point, whether she knows it or not. And bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So a Nazirite has three things, a Nazirite vow. 1, you don't cut your hair. 2, you don't drink alcohol or wine. 3, you don't touch a corpse. And 4th, he adds on to her, don't eat anything unclean while you're pregnant. That actually was a law for all Israelite women, not to eat anything unclean while they were pregnant, but they probably weren't following this law at this time, which is why the angel tells her, hey, you need to do this, okay? So he's basically telling her, you're pregnant, or you're soon to become pregnant. You have a male child, and it's going to be a Nazirite, and you need to follow these rules. Now, this is in contrast to what a normal Nazirite vow is. A normal Nazirite vow is a voluntary vow. For Samson, it is not a voluntary vow. He is dedicated as a Nazirite when he is conceived, okay? And it's so a normal one is voluntary. It's also time limited. His is not time limited. It's for his entire life. So his is a very unique Nazirite vow. Also, he doesn't really have a choice in the matter, which is the way it normally works. So it's a little bit of a unique situation for Samson. Okay, so understandably, the mother is going to be very excited at this. Now, if you go back when the angel appeared to Gideon, Gideon was initially skeptical of what the angel had to say and asked a bunch of questions. Notice she doesn't do that. Okay, she's just like, she doesn't even ask any questions. She just accepts what he says and goes with it. So verse 6, so the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God. How did she know this? How did she know it was a man of God, and how did she know it was the angel of God? I don't know. It doesn't say, other than something about his countenance, I guess, made her think that. She's right, but I'm not sure exactly how she came to that conclusion. I don't know if the angel told her this or she just inferred it from the way he appeared. I'm not sure. But it goes on to say, very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death. So she recounts the story to the husband. The husband Manoah is not super bright, okay? And he gets a little annoyed that the angel appeared to the wife instead of to him, okay? So verse 8, he says, it makes it, at first reading, it sort of sounds like he's appealing to God for some further explanation here, but that's probably not what really is going on. He's trying to gain control of the situation and get the upper hand in the situation, and he wants to extract more information from probably at this point he thinks it's a human. He doesn't think it's an angel yet. So he wants this person to come back so that he can have a further conversation, and they actually hear it from the person himself, not through his wife. Okay, so he's a little annoyed at how this took place. So verse 8, then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born. What does he think he needs to be taught? The angel already told him exactly what he needs to do. Okay, so he's not really being completely honest here. The reason for having the angel come back is not to be taught more stuff about what they need to do as parents. So verse 9, and God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman. Now you can imagine, the angel went back up to heaven. And then Manoah prays, and then God's like, okay, angel, go back down. I'm sure the angel was probably like really thrilled he had to go back and do this a second time. And you can tell by the conversation he's actually not really thrilled about it. It's kind of humorous. So the angel is going to kind of toy with Manoah, and I know we're not going to get very far. Manoah is going to ask him a series of questions, and he does not answer any of them except to tell him what he has already told the wife. So he refuses to tell Manoah any additional information than what he's already told the wife in the story, okay? So verse 9, and God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman again as she was sitting in the field. Notice the angel comes back, but she appears to the wife again. She doesn't appear to Manoah, which is going to probably irritate him a little bit more. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. We'll just finish verse 10. Then the woman ran in haste and told her husband and said to him, look, the man who came to me the other day has just now appeared to me. So the angel comes back a second time, but again only appears to the wife initially. She runs and gets Manoah, and then there's going to be a conversation between Manoah and the angel, which will start next week. But the conversation is pretty funny because Manoah is trying to gain the upper hand in the conversation because he thinks he's talking to a human. So he's trying to get the upper hand on this human, and the angel is not having any of it. So it's kind of funny, and we'll talk about it next week. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
I was sinking deep in sin, far from the sinful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry. From the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me. Song of invitation will be number 31. Number 31.
Good evening. Life on Earth in the 21st century is extremely fast-paced. It is stressful, often confusing, and it's very complicated. The day-to-day grind sometimes can just leave you at the end of the day wondering, how did I even get through this day? What did I accomplish? It can sometimes feel like you've kind of got, spaghetti brain. You're just sitting there trying to figure out what happened. And as we continue each one of these days and we continue to work, we continue to go run around doing a million different things, it can often be easy to lose sight while we're trying to do all these things here of what we actually have to look forward to after this life. So for that, we're going to go to the scriptures. If y'all will turn with me or look at the screen, we're going to read from 1 Peter chapter 1. We're going to read verses 3 through 5. 1 Peter 1, 3 through 5. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith, for salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. So Christ died on a cross and was raised from the dead, the greatest miracle that has ever happened in the history of this world, so that we would no longer need to worry about the cares of this life. He died so that we could have these miraculous gifts. And there's 4 of them mentioned here. The first is a living hope. Okay. The second one is that we have an inheritance. Okay. This inheritance is incorruptible. Unlike everything else that you'll see on this earth, our inheritance is not susceptible to any form of decay. It's undefiled. Think about the most pure thing you can possibly think of. It's more pure than that. And it's unfading. You see often in these, historical archives, people work so hard just to slow down the process of fading of documents or artwork. You don't have to worry about that with your inheritance in Christ. Each of these qualities would be desirable in its own right if you separated it out from everything else. Just having one pure thing, even if it would fade, many people would give a lot of money, a lot of time to that endeavor. But we can have all of these things. And it says that these are kept or reserved in heaven. For who? For you. For me. Reserved. We don't have to, the worst thing in life is when I show up at like a restaurant, right? And I have to wait. I don't have a reservation. I'm wondering if I'm going to get in, right? You don't have to worry about that. You know that you have that spot. You know that you have this inheritance waiting for you. But how do we get to that? Right? It says through faith for salvation. Okay, so what does that faith consist of? Okay, the first aspect is belief. Okay, as we see with the Philippian jailer, as we see in John 3:16, we must believe to inherit eternal life. We must repent, as the Bible says in Luke 13:3. We must confess, much as the Apostle Peter, who is writing this, said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That confession is part of that faith that leads us to salvation. Baptism, as we see in Acts, as we see with both the Philippian jailer, the Ethiopian eunuch, numerous examples in Scripture. That final step of being buried and reenacting the death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ from the dead. And finally, just living faithfully. That's all. You don't have to earn anything. You just have to accept the gift that Christ has put in front of you. You just have to accept this great inheritance. And as we talked about earlier with all of these things on earth, it wouldn't take 2 seconds for us to say, if someone said they were going to give you, even $100, you just say, yes, I will take it. You're not, if I could just accept a gift freely, I will gladly do it with no second thoughts. So why would we have any second thoughts about accepting a gift that will last for eternity? The inheritance before us is better than anything we can imagine on earth. And it's accessible at any time. It's accessible right now. It's accessible 5 minutes after this service ends. It's acceptable at 1 in the morning, right? Christ's invitation is open at all times. So is tonight the night? Is tonight the night that you reserve your inheritance with Christ? That you decide you want to live faithfully for Him? Or maybe you've lost sight of that goal. Maybe you've fallen back into the hustle and the bustle of the world, and you've lost sight of what that ultimate goal is in heaven. Whatever your need may be tonight, won't you come as we stand and sing?
Almost persuaded Christ to receive, seems now some soul to save. Go, Spirit, go thy way, some more convenient day on thee I'll call. Almost persuaded, come today. Almost persuaded, turn not away. Jesus invite you here. Angels are lingering near. Prayers rise from hearts so dear. Oh, wonder come. Almost persuaded, harvest is past. Almost persuaded, doom comes at last. Almost cannot avail, almost is but to fail. Sad, sad, that bitter wail, almost but